Forgot my other glasses in the car.
I was gonna say, are you being Joe Cool or what?
Do everything all over again.
Doesn't help.
Okay, start over. Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our February 21st Mayor's Commission on Disabilities Issues meeting. I'll call the meeting to order. And are there any public comments? I take that as none, so we'll move on to the minutes for the January meeting.
The minutes we need to defer those. Can we get a motion then?
Can I have someone make a motion to defer those minutes to the next meeting?
Motion.
It's been carried. Do I have a second?
Yes, I second it.
It's moved in second. All in favor, say aye.
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 All right, the ayes have it. We'll now have a brief review of the plan to make the city facilities fully ADA compliant as presented to the Charleston City Council on February 11th.
Ron's not here, so I'll give the brief review if that's okay. We presented to the City Council a PowerPoint of a list of priorities that the commission created and prioritized. And we had there with us Ron Ferretra, Alex Jackson, and Michael Drohan in the meeting. Marka Daniel tried to make it, Danielle, but was unable to get there, unfortunately. But I think it worked out pretty well. The city council members, sorry.
I was there,
Mika was there too. Mika Gadsden was there. Forgive me.
Okay.
Okay. She was chief in charge of rolling the slides for me, the clicker. I think it worked out pretty well. Several of the council members had questions and I didn't fall flat on my face. So that's, always a success, basically. I will share with anybody who'd like to see the PowerPoint. It has been shared around city staff to some degree already, and I think we're getting somewhere on it. I appreciate the commission for contributing information to create the PowerPoint. Thank you.
Thank you for that update. Now we'll have a report of the planning for the July 2025 celebration, and I'll provide that update. We met earlier this month to talk about preliminary ideas of having the anniversary celebration of the Americans with Disabilities Act. It will be on Saturday, July 26th this year. And last year we held our inaugural event out at the Park Circle Community Center where the new accessible playground is out in North Charleston. And so we're in talks about where we want to hold the event this year. We're looking to hold it within the city of Charleston at one of the venues within the city. So I'm still planning details there, possibly having a speaker come in to present and share information, as well as having organizations from around the Low Country that serve the disability community to come out and share their information and network with the community. So those are the major updates. Does Janet or Mika have any additional things to add?
Our next meeting will be in March.
Awesome.
And anybody who wants to join is of course welcome to join. Planning celebrations is so much fun. But the event itself should be fun. So looking forward to it.
Absolutely. So we'll move on to the exchange of ideas with our guests, City of Charleston building officials.
Thank you for being here. We appreciate it a lot. Can we start with y'all introducing yourselves, please? Ken, you go.
Sure. Ken Granada, City of Charleston, Chief Building Official.
Derek Graham, I'm one of the plan reviewers.
Yuri Hope, I'm the deputy building official.
Patricia Holman, Inspection Services Coordinator.
And Maurice Brown, Field Inspection Supervisor.
Can they be seen on camera? Or?
No, they're sitting off camera.
Okay.
So what the commission had wanted is for us to exchange ideas on what's really good. We realized that when you're inspecting and when you're reviewing plans and putting all that together, the ADA is not as dire as inspecting for electrical. It's not as expensive maybe as for HVAC, but it's really important to us. And so we wanted to just go over it in general. We've talked about a few things in here previously, but just so that we can limit our scope, you do not inspect parking places, correct?
That's correct.
You do not inspect sidewalks leading into the buildings.
If it's part of the accessible path from parking, yes, we can look at that.
And then you do then inspect from the door into the building.
That's correct.
Great. Now, I haven't asked the commissioners to come up with any particular questions. Do y'all have any for starters?
I have a question. So you all only inspect city buildings, is that correct, or is it private?
We inspect all buildings.
Okay. Is there a requirement only for city buildings to have the accessible button to open doors, or does that extend to privately owned businesses as well?
I have a hearing disability.
I'll try to catch that one. So just as an overview, we administer and enforce the South Carolina building codes. In the South Carolina building codes, there is a requirement for accessibility and usability. The reference standard is the ICC A117.1. Right now, we're under the 2017 version of that. There's a separate state law that brings that code in. Outside of the code cycle, the building cycles, we cycle codes every 3 years, usually what the state adopts. But that's under a separate, and that code, when that gets updated, technically the state goes under the most current version of that standard. But everything is coming out of the South Carolina Building Code to give you reference, which refers to that standard. There are two primary chapters in the South Carolina Building Code. There's chapter 10, which deals with means of egress. There is a section on accessible means of egress, which is required for all buildings. We review all buildings in the city except for federal and state buildings. We don't do College of Charleston if it's a state building. We don't do MEOSC if it's a state building. But all of the buildings, including city facilities, are reviewed by us. So there's chapter 10 of the South Carolina Building Code that deals with the means of egress, getting out of the building and making sure that's accessible. And then chapter 11 deals with accessibility requirements, which would then go to standards out of that standard. That talks about 60% of public entrances have to be accessible, up to, it goes as far as if there's residential units, if residential units need to be accessible type A or type B units, there's percentages in that. It talks about if there's parking provided, then a percentage of those or a number of those parking spots need to be accessible, minimum one being van accessible. So those are the drivers for us when it comes to accessibility and usability in the code. To your direct question about the push button automated door piece, that isn't necessarily a requirement. It is typically an alternative to the clearances and to a door for door pull or push, right? There's clearances to the side and back to allow for maneuverability and constraints within that area. The automatic paddle piece is a great alternative when we don't have that. That ability, especially in existing buildings, historic buildings, and other places where just can't get that maneuverability. But also down to hardware and handles, those sort of things we're looking at. Okay. So just to give you a little basis of where we come from on that, we do review it in plan review, accessible routes, and making sure they address obviously, the building code and the standard within that. And, we look very much at like restroom, elements, right? Especially on the inspection side, when we're on the ground looking at it, that's where it really comes into play. But, protection of piping underneath, the skull protection to the hardware for the ability to use facilities, compartments in the restroom as well, and clearances. Turning radius is a big thing. Some of our plan reviewers are very focused on it.
Marka has her hand raised. Just-
1 second, Narca, we see you have a question. I'm
Okay.
gonna further that just a little bit because the ANSI requires that the doors have 5 pounds of weight for push, unless it's a fire door. And when it's a fire door, now y'all have to correct me when I'm wrong, okay? Promise?
I'm not sure. I can
Okay.
use my heart.
But the fire door, it comes under the fire department then, at that point. So they can make it as heavy as they want, if I'm not mistaken.
I don't think that's
Good.
quite accurate.
Okay.
So the building code is really what drives that, and the fire code, it's both in both fire code and the building code. There is, I don't know if it's 15 pounds, I don't quote me.
15 seems to be the
I
magic
feel
number
like it
for
might be 15.
fire doors.
Yeah, this is part of the means of egress, not all doors necessarily, right into the closets and other things, bathrooms, but the means of egress doors have a requirement, partially because of pressure. As you have fire and other set of vents, you build up pressure, and so you want to make sure the door stays closed. Is part of why that requirement's there.
So then that dovetails into Alex's question that Title II of the ADA requires that programs be accessible. So when programs are accessible, that's extraneous of the building code. And if we have a program like this meeting in here, then we need for people with disabilities to be able to get in, and that's where pushing the button is required in that situation. But that's only for civic buildings that are smaller than the federal government and state buildings. The state will have to take care of themselves. I can't, I'm not gonna take them on. But for city buildings, we've had a lot of good success in getting like the doors out here.
I recall that back in the day when this building was coming online. Well,
Yeah.
actually, it had already been online, I think.
It had been online, but it took me a minute to find the footnote so they'd believe me. So Dustin was loath to do anything else until I found the footnote. So that's when the program access does on occasion require the push buttons just for that reason. From my perspective, if y'all know differently, say differently. The commission has asked that the first thing on the list that was presented to city council was to assess which city buildings have push button entries and which ones need them. So we'll be looking at that. Now, Marcus, sorry, I ran over you. What was your question?
Sorry. I guess what I'm hearing is that there's a whole lot that the city can't do. I mean, no parking lots inspected, things like that. And the doors, the fire department, it seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like the bureaucracy has it set up really, really well to keep us from making progress in general. I mean, what about the streets and things like that? The videos that I've sent to you, where does all of that fit in with regards to the city? So I guess those are my questions and comments.
Yeah, some of the streets fall under Matt Alpop's group, not the building inspections division of the city. Some of them did you have a?
When you finish.
Okay, some of them that were on our list, like we had on the list, the corner of John and King, the corner of Cumming and Calhoun, those are being looked at now by Matt Altop's group to see about getting those to become accessible. Mark, I think that, I don't think there's a diabolical plot to keep us
No, I
out of
didn't mean
places.
that. It just, I didn't really, I mean, I'm not going to the conspiracy theorist.
Okay, good.
But it just, it's very convenient that it's so much of a challenge.
It is a challenge.
So, so Martha, to kind of respond, I acknowledge your frustration. And I share some of those frustrations in terms of the limitations of state code. Prior to this meeting this afternoon, I joined Katie Zimmerman with Charleston Moves. She convened a small call with other members of the disability community that are not affiliated with our commission. And that call, on that call, we heard from city colleague James Wallace with traffic and transportation. And we heard from, what's the gentleman's name, from a member of the Kyle James of the BCD COG. And while I'm not contradicting anything that was shared or will be shared here, but what I kind of got from that space was that we need to create more spaces where we can workshop solutions that are both compliant with state code, but perhaps there's a little bit of like a wiggle room or some flexibility in other areas at other levels of government, or just within some civic organizations where we can kind of make some strides and create that accessibility specific to your call out about streets. So I'd love to talk to you about whether or not we could convene another space. I know Katie's very active with the zoning rewrite activity, which I know is on pause right now, but I think there are other ways for us to supplement or fill in gaps, or at least try to brainstorm on that, if that makes any sense. But I just wanted to offer that up.
Yes, no, I'm happy to be involved with as much as I can to make all of Charleston more accessible, and where the state and federal meet, you know, across these borders, if you will, for lack of a better word at the moment. I mean, I think that's where the conversation needs to go. So yes, please feel free, Janet, to give my information, and I'd be happy for you to reach out to me.
Absolutely, I'll be in touch.
Thank you so much.
Actually,
Good. No, please.
you know, when we say that we don't look at parking lots, actually different agencies within.
That's what I'm like, that's what I'm, yeah.
Do look at that. Engineering looks at curb cuts, they look at handicap ramps getting into buildings, they look at the striping and the handicap parking in the parking lots, and this is on new buildings and renovated things. One of the things that a lot of people also don't realize is the building inspections division. We inspect new and renovated buildings. We don't inspect existing buildings. So, you know, there's kind of a break over there. If it's an existing building with an existing problem, we won't usually be involved in that until they go to remodel. So
That's helpful.
we do, you know, there are parts in the code that specify that handicapped accessibility has to be addressed to a certain point. Basically it says, I think, with we can require them to require 5% of the project.
20%. It's up to 20%.
Or 20% rather
of the
of the
project
project
costs.
has should go towards handicapped accessibility. And in some cases, that's a good bit of money. In some cases,
It never covers an elevator, does it?
Not ours.
So the codes and the way it's been handled over the years has not truly been effective in. I
Well,
know when they
can
first adopted the the ADA requirements 30 years ago. The intent was that 20 years, every building should be handicapped accessible. Well, the way they tied it to the codes, it never required retroactivity in buildings. So it's only been addressed through new buildings and renovations, which a lot of buildings never get enough work done to require that breakover where.
Yeah, well, may I interrupt for a minute, please? Because I'm going to go to a case when you're sitting in the building that was renovated and millions of dollars were spent. And what we had to go through to fight for just door openers. Electric door openers were not on that building when it was done. I know for a fact that it opened without proper occupancy permits, so Spoleto could take place. And I was in the building at a production, in a theater or dance performance, when the fire alarms were off and they didn't have a plan for me to get out. So I know that things are not happening at the level that they should be happening. And that's just one example. And Janet can tell you, we went round and round and round about with a whole group of people who are in this meeting now to try and get the Gilliard at least a little more accessible. And there's still things that are not proper. So I have a little bit of a sour taste in my mouth about it all.
One of the other things that we'll point out is our codes are minimal codes.
It's true.
Not necessarily what you.
But it's what's right. It's what's right. You can spend hundreds of $1,000s on Italian tiles to make the building look pretty, but you can't spend the money to put electronic buttons so the doors open. The bathroom door by that meeting room right now is still next to impossible for somebody in a power chair to get into by themselves.
Yeah, and
That was number 3 on the list. We're getting to that one too, yeah.
Sorry, okay, so I guess I'm saying too much now at this point, but I guess, you know, as a part of this committee, I feel very strongly that you on your end need to be much more aware, maybe spend some time in a wheelchair and roll around to some of these places. I know other buildings that, you know, new buildings, let's look at them with somebody who is actually in a wheelchair so things can be brought up so that they can be done properly and to code. Because, you know, I mean, I could go on naming places that was renovated and rather they allowed the place to take one of their handicap accessible parking spots away. They had 2 in the parking lot and they took one away. So there's lots of little things that I know are
Where's
missed.
that one, Mark? I don't know that one.
Well, it happened a long time ago. So it's not worth bringing up in the.
Gotcha, okay.
Yeah.
Now, I guess one of the things that I kind of want to, you know, we understand your frustrations and we try to interpret and enforce the code to the extent that we can. We are limited in some respects. For example, you know, we could recommend that they put push buttons on doors, but we can't require it. Actually, to get to that point, the people you need to be addressing it to are the owners, controllers of the buildings, because they can specify whatever they want. We can only enforce what's in the code for South Carolina. And yeah, I can agree, because one of the things that I see all the time is we have push button hardware on a lot of the doors here. And if those push buttons don't work, to push some of these doors open is very difficult. And door hardware is a very difficult thing to keep tuned up to the point that it meets, because it, you know, brand new, when we do the inspections, yeah, they're going to meet that 15-pound requirement for a regular exit door. And, for the fire doors, what it says is, it can take 30 pounds to unlatch it. But then it takes 15 pounds to fully open it. That's brand new. We can say, yeah, that needs to be. A majority of the problems that we see with exit doors actually comes after they've been installed for years. A lot of that hardware wears out, and instead of being 15 pounds, now it's 30 pounds for a normal door. And unfortunately, we don't have control over that per se. So a lot of that. goes
Maintenance
back
is a good thing to
building
put down
owners.
this list.
What was that?
Maintenance is a good thing to put down on this list.
Yeah,
I see that Marnique has her hand raised and then Annette.
Wow.
Marnique,
She was raised. She's
Marnique's audio is off right now.
We'll come back to Marnique and Annette. You can go now. if you
Yeah,
have a
I just wanted to speak out because both Marnique and Michael had their hands up. So I just wanted to make sure that they had a chance to make their comments.
Oh, thank you, Annette. I was just honestly, I was back and forth with whether I needed to comment or not. As you guys showing me either clarified or defended things. To clarify, you guys are all of this you're talking about is just new construction and new buildings, or at least buildings of created after the ADA.
I'll clarify. So building inspections, the way that this is all derived from state law and our ordinance, but building inspections deals with buildings of any age, new construction, of course, buildings of any age that
I can't hear the response.
I'm sorry, what you say? You can't hear my response?
I can hear it. I think it was Marnique who said she
Oh,
couldn't.
okay.
Yeah.
Usually I talk loud enough.
Yeah.
So I'll start over. So building inspections based on again, we're administering state law here, South Carolina building codes and the existing building code, which we adopt, by the way, at our city level. It all is hinged on new construction and alterations or change of occupancy to existing buildings. Again, we're not looking at buildings that operate much like this building here at the city is operating normally, isn't going under alteration, construction, or a change of occupancy, which would drive us to become involved. I guess I'll say it that way. So that's the context of which we work. And so in new construction, it's based on the applicable code at the time of new construction. And so, codes change, right, and evolve. So what was approved 30, 40 years ago under a code would likely not be what is today. This is in general, not just accessibility and usability. It's means of egress, it's life safety, it's structural for that matter. So everything evolves over time. And so we're continuously evolving with it and working with those codes based on, at the time, like Gary said, when we're there. We were only there for a few moments of construction, honestly. And once we're done, many things change. Let me say that.
I've seen ramps disappear.
Yes, things change. Parking lots get striped over the weekend.
All the time.
All the time, right? So admittedly, and we have only the resources we have, and we're looking at that whole book and 3-4 other books as well. So admittedly, it's a challenge. It is definitely a focus of ours. I think we all are in tune with it to that regard.
Well, okay, so what is kind of my initial question that I was going back and forth whether to ask.
Yeah.
So if we just talk about like stores on King Street, which is one of the oldest Lower Kings, one of the oldest areas of the city, but under what you just said, they're always changing occupancy. So and with the reason I bring them up is that so many of them on King have lips, so they're inaccessible for wheelchair. Some might say, okay, we can get you in around back. That doesn't seem easy for anyone to have to figure out, and there's barely like a small alleyway or whatever to go down. So how do you say, okay, the new clothing store that moved in has to provide a ramp or something so a person in a wheelchair can get in?
Yeah, good question. Thank you.
Can I say something?
Yeah,
I
please.
think, when Ken talks about, changing occupancy, he's not speaking of occupant. So if you have somebody who sells clothes move out and somebody else who sells clothes move in, that is not an occupancy change. Both of them are considered mercantile, so that wouldn't, create
And what about a restaurant too? Is a restaurant
Now,
so
that's-
much or
If a restaurant was there and then somebody who sells clothes move in, then that's an occupancy change. So that one would fall into what you're talking about, but.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and thank you, Derek. Yeah, that's, I was gonna say the same thing. And with that, so that gets us in the door, if you will. I'm actually try that one. That gets us in the door to start to look at it. But then, as Gary said, especially with existing buildings and alterations, when it comes to accessibility, there's a couple of components there. Like if you're adding a restroom, right, that restroom needs to be accessible. However, if there's another accessible restroom already there and they're clustered together, the code allows, and especially speaking of King Street, when you're limited in space, the code allows and says, hey, as long as they're not gender defined, right? If you have two single-use restrooms, let me say that for anybody, one can be accessible and the other one doesn't have to be accessible. So there are lots of things at play with that. The other piece of the change of occupancy or the alteration is the cost of construction, as Gary was saying. There are limitations.
20%.
The 20% piece. And a lot of things, a lot of these pieces, because there's many groups involved in the code development on these. So just like someone mentioned, you've got the owners and developers who are looking at the bottom line for activating that space and what the codes are trying to obtain. And so that's why you'll see these limits on the 20% and they're all minimums because there was a balanced strike with many of these code sections to say, well, if you ask us to make every time we touch a building to make it fully accessible, and I'll get to the King Street piece in a minute, we wouldn't be able to do it. Right? That's always going to be their stance. So, if we understand and they'll say, I'm not speaking for them, but the idea is we understand and want to be part of the solution. How about this? Let's meet in the middle. So that's what you'll see with codes all the time, not just with accessibility, with everything. That's across the board. So I just kind of want to give you some context of how the codes are developed that we administer. Second, on the King Street, before being in Charleston, I worked for the city of Alexandria, which is just as historic and has all the brick and is on hills. Fortunately, these were flat here, and we had all the same issues on King Street, by the way, in Alexandria, same street.
I'm from up there.
Yeah, that's right. So the issue with King Street typically is the property line. Same thing in Alexandria. The face of those buildings are the property line. And so for a owner to go encroach into the public property, public right of way, and alter that is an issue, right, for the city. And so I think it's a good idea that we have that discussion and try to work out something. Again, that's really engineering that does the right of way. That's not us. I think obviously there are places where we can make improvements. That might be one, but it's very difficult to augment the right of way by a building owner. And so that's why we have these issues where where we have to accept that to a certain extent, like what becomes technically infeasible by the code is one of the terms they use. We just don't have any means really to get there. So it does come to okay, so what else can we do, right? You can put a push paddle on it, we can do that for sure. It still doesn't change. We've made it, improved it, but we still haven't quite gotten there. So if we truly want to get there and we have these thresholds where it's 20% or a new building or a change of occupancy or whatever it might be, there are times where we do have to look at alternative means to get folks into buildings. And sometimes it doesn't feel appropriate and what should be, but sometimes it is what we have within the constraints and limitations that.
The big idea I have for King Street is, and maybe this is a code or more of an occupancy code rather than a building code, or I don't know how those two are different. If everyone got foldable ramps to have wheelchair users just put out while they're trying to get in, they can be removed easily, just you know, to get someone inside the door with dignity and not having to have like 3 people lift them in, and all that would be a very simple solution. Sure, it might cost, these things are like $100 to a couple $100 on Amazon, but yeah, a simple solution.
And thank you for bringing, you know, alternatives is absolutely a lot of what we have to work with. It doesn't, so we're caught in a little bit of a bind with something like that. I think it's appropriate and a great idea. It doesn't meet code though. That's where we.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. That's the idea. It's not your ability to enforce, but
yeah. Well, I mean, you know, honestly, if this group would say, you know, could come out and say that that's appropriate, maybe we could look at that if everybody's in accord with that as an alternative means, method, and design. Yes, sir.
When you say it's not to code, is that for the angle of the ramp or for the building?
Well, it might be the slope of the ramp for sure, right? But we have to deal with that too. There are times where, you know, you really should have the 1 in 12.
Yeah.
Code gives a little bit of flexibility, but geez, if we put a 1 in 8 because of this, we could do it, but it doesn't meet code. I can approve something like that. But there's got to be good, just reason for it. The thing with the just to go back to your temporary, you know, ramp, it goes back kind of what Gary says over time. The ramp goes away. The employees that work there, and this is just my experience with this, and I'm not saying this happens every time. Employees have no clue about it. How to use it, when to use it, where it is, that they need to use it. So things that, and that's why I think the code kind of shies away from that sort of thing, because the code's asking for things not to have essentially human intervention on a lot of this stuff. So, but you know, it's something to consider. And if I, you know, if you all came to me, you know, and said, hey, you know, we're acceptable to something like this, then I would feel more comfortable, though it doesn't meet code, allowing an alternative means, methods, and design, which is in the code, right? I'm allowed to recognize things that aren't in the letter of the code, but meet the intent. Sure.
8% if it's not more than 6 feet.
Okay. I don't have that one.
No, that's okay. I've
Yeah.
used it on a lot of churches where you may not have even been there.
And again, just you know, at least from the code's perspective, it's an evolution, it's a progression. The codes are way behind for what you all are seeing today in innovation and meaning, you know, in whatever it might be. The codes are at the national level are behind, and then by the time the state reviews them and adopts them, we're even further behind, 6 to 9 years sometimes on the codes.
The developers still get really angry. Who's next? Martinique?
Yes, thanks so much. I finally found my my taskbar on the phone. I'm normally on the computer, but the 2 points or questions that I had, one of them was way back when we were talking about the streets. Is there an available map that would detail the jurisdictions of the streets? I've been looking since the last meeting on the city website and on the county website, And I'm not able to tell, like, is there something that you know of that's maybe the city's one color, the county's one color, you would able, to more readily have talking points on which streets are most used and have most access and most issues?
Martinique, go to SCDOT, Street Finder. And it'll
Okay.
tell you who owns what street.
Perfect.
It's not a
Okay.
map.
All right. Well, I mean, that's a good starting place. And the
And
other-
I can help you more if you need more,
I'd love it. And the other question that I had was related to, I kept hearing 20% when we were talking about the, development or reconstruction of some of the buildings. Is it something that would be entertained if this commission were to say, here's a prioritization list when you're considering these renovations? And I know it's going to be different per site, but if they were able to say, like, per this building, our priorities in your 20% budget or your 20% allocation would be, these line items. And then that way it would be at least a checklist that has some buy-in and some, authentic voice to what would be most useful on a, person-to-person real case, and not someone who's just like with an architecture background that has no disability experience or knowledge.
I welcome something like that. If you mean like, going to each building as it's going through permitting and inspections, I'm not sure that's feasible. But the code does gives in the commentary, which is in code, it kind of talks about the code section. The priority is obviously getting people into the building. That's the priority. When a building isn't fully compliant, right? It's getting into the building, and then you go into what the code calls for accessibility, the primary functions of the building. So that's like getting to this conference room, for instance, is a primary function, for instance, our offices. And that includes the restrooms and the drinking fountains. That's part of the route to the primary function. So I would absolutely welcome if you all wanted to come up with a list of priorities. Again, our approach is, getting into the building first is the biggest one.
Right.
And then
But I
from
mean,
there,
it's often the largest limitation. So, even knowing that per this building, a person that has, these types of modes of transportation, mobility, it would be within the 20% that it would be considered versus just saying, here's the most cost efficient, most architecturally sound, quickest way to get it done.
Yeah, and on that note, it's a great point. When you think about the cost of construction, the 20%, just an example, let's just say the project is $20,000. The total cost is $20,000, right? And so up to 20%, because if it only takes $5 to get it fully compliant, that's all you need to do, right? But in this case, that's $4,000. But you can't get into the building, right? Well, applying the $4,000, we've got it's going to cost whatever, $100,000, for instance, to get into the building, because it's a grade change. You got to do ramps, yada yada. So that's what happens is, okay, well that's we got to pass that check, that first one. What's the next thing we can do? Is it door hardware? Right now, maybe we can't get into the building, but at least when you're in the building, for others, right, that still need those components. Let's look at door hardware. Let's look at the drinking fountain or something in the restroom. So that's what often happens because of that constraint.
Yeah, I've run into that.
And I guess the other question would be, is it, knowing that this is a detailed process and, architecture and building often has phases, is it something that is like a common occurrence that maybe in the first phase, you only get the accessibility to the building, but you would see in the blueprints that the universal design is present, and then you would be able to go back to that, gradually as, the second, third tier phase of the project? Is that something that's currently happening, or is it something that could be a possibility?
For us, it's all about what is being permitted. I guess that would kind of play into phasing, but that's what we're working from. Like, you come in, you have a retail space, right? You're gonna fitted out. We taught you about that specifically based on the cost and what you're doing. And this is the idea of the code, is progression is, okay, you go in, we got something out of that. Let's talk about that $4,000 again. Right, we couldn't get you into the space, but we updated the restrooms a bit. Maybe one of the compartments wasn't big enough and they were able to make it bigger. I'm not sure. You leave because you've grown and you're gonna get a bigger space. Next person comes in, and this is the whole idea, and does something else. Then we have that same conversation, right? And so over time, the idea is, at least the intent of the code, is to build over time. So kind of your same point, but we're only looking at that permit and that construction or change of occupancy at that time.
Ron, you have your hand up.
Annette was
No.
next.
What?
Annette was next.
Oh, Annette was next. Excuse me, Annette, you have your hand up.
No, actually, let Ron go and I'll come back.
Okay. Go, Ron.
The building codes require that when you exceed 50% plus $1 of the assessed value of the building, that you have to come all the way up to code. But the city's not doing it for its own facilities. Why is that?
I think this maybe this is a general misunderstanding if I understand what you're saying. So the 50% rule or is maybe what you're talking about. That's related to flood design. If that's what you're referring to, I'm not sure if the other 50% rule, I don't think we have it. But the 50% piece is one of the value of the building, not property or appurtenances or other accessory buildings. The value of this building, for instance, right? Let's just say it's $100, the value of the building, right? And the city's coming in to renovate it, right? And they're going to spend $51 on it. And it's in a flood zone. We would require that building to come into full flood design requirement. It is not bringing the building fully into compliance with the whole book. It is only that which deals with flood. So that's a separate piece.
So then the city can do all the renovations it wants to a building and it doesn't have to come up to code.
Well, it would go back to the 20% piece. And the 20% rule, if you will, about, okay, well, the building isn't fully compliant. And again, it would be challenging talking about necessarily, door weights and pushing,
The city did over $1 million worth of work on the Martin Luther King pool, and the original plan for when they covered the pool didn't even include a ramp.
A ramp into the pool?
No.
A ramp to the pool?
Into the pool area, yeah. A ramp to get from outside up the steps and into the door.
Okay. That would be something,
I mean, now we have a ramp, but what I'm saying is that the city's not following the rules.
Well, I have to run and my team is better even talking about than I am, but I'll address this one real quick. My recommendation to the commission, if you don't do this already, is talking, so Parks Department, it oversees all capital projects and facilities and maintenance for the city. Having dialogue with them and reminding them and talking about these issues is a great idea. And I'll also say AIA Charleston, Association, American Institute of Architects, AIA, in Charleston, they invite us a couple times a year to talk about flood stuff. Is always the one they want to talk about. But, having these conversations and at least, re-emphasizing or reminding them as well is what I would recommend, on some of this. Because it is a full team effort here, not just us. We're all in this together. And I hate to say it, I have to run.
Okay, so I would like to go through the commission members and ask them what they enjoy most about modified structures. So get the team members to tell you what they are, okay?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Because, you know, things like the horizontal grab bar, that kind of thing is surprisingly helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are the things that, you know, we would even pass on to while we're going through the permitting system. Hey, you know.
The commission says that this is surprisingly helpful.
Yeah.
Having the mirror at the right height
Yes.
over the lavatory is amazing.
Okay.
That kind of stuff.
And admittedly, I will speak for everybody. Those are things we probably aren't focusing on. And it would be a challenge us to focus on if we didn't know about it. Especially for Maurice and his team out in the field. You know, again, we're looking at 1,000 components, not just accessibility. But if we had some stuff that you're like, okay, and so think about that in your priorities. A priority of 100 isn't really a priority.
And if we don't get that verbally today, I'll put it down on a list and we'll share it.
Yeah, great. Thank you for having me out. Thank you all.
Thank
for
you
sticking with me.
for sticking around and.
Can I say one thing really quickly before he goes?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you consider hiring a part-time person with a disability in a wheelchair that might be able to work in conjunction with your office when you go out for
Work with the
inspections?
commission and the city. I don't, I have limited control over who I get to, expanding positions, let me say it that way, and what they're for. But yes, I mean, another recommendation from you all that I can, and probably from a couple different angles, discuss that.
All right, thank you. And I'm sorry, Annette, for busting in. I'm done.
Thank you.
And actually, just FYI for you, we have a part-time consultant we use occasionally right now. You know, when we're dealing with some of these accessibility issues, the codes are black and white, but the buildings are actually gray. A lot of times, what's in the code doesn't cover everything that we run into, and there's a lot of holes in the codes on how you handle that. And we try to, I use Janet a lot of times if I run into something that I'm not comfortable with one way or another, you know, we'll bring her in and help us or help give us some guidance. So we appreciate that from whoever we can get. Our people are serious about handicapped accessibility. That is not an issue to our people. We try to enforce what we can enforce, what's in the code to the extent that we can. And actually a lot of my guys take pride in it because I have some guys that are pretty close to needing the handicap services that we are dictating. So we're fully aware and we are fully committed to do that. So I don't want to give you an impression that we don't want to, but the thing that we always have to fall back to is we can only enforce what the law says we can enforce. And what I'm hearing from you guys here, understandably, is y'all would like more beyond that. And I can appreciate that. Myself, I've lived around the handicapped family member for years and years, and in an old house that was multi-levels and different things. And it's a challenge. There are some nuances in the code that we have to use every now and then. In the code, there are some issues where it talks about when things are not technically feasible. In some cases, particularly when you talk about these buildings on King Street, when they're built right on the street, to make them fully handicapped accessible is a challenge because the code actually speaks of when things are technically not feasible, and they have some definitions and different things. They give us a little guidance on that. They talk about when you change the structure of the building to add some of this, then in some cases, they'll say it's technically not feasible to do. And we just can't do it. I mean, it's, yeah, and I'm like Ken, I came from Virginia where we have hills and I lived in a smaller town that was very challenged in the main section of town because it was built with hills and the buildings are right on the street. And to get ramps and stuff, you just can't do it. It's just not there.
We are coming up on 5 o'clock. If y'all can stay, fine. I won't ask you to stay though past 5 o'clock, which may be quitting time. But Annette, do you have a question?
I just had a quick comment. My whole thing is, we've been talking about this over time, is that if the structural issues don't come up to code, the building wouldn't be allowed to open. If the fire code wasn't up to code or the water access up to code, it would not be allowed to open. And I know we're talking that the codes that you're dealing with is limited to 20%, but I would like to see that the businesses or the building has to at least meet that standard before it is allowed to open.
And that generally is, like I say, we generally deal with new buildings, renovated buildings, additions, and that type of thing. We allow some buildings to open sometimes under a temporary condition. But usually if we are opening that building where it's actually fully open to the public, all the handicapped accessibility issues that are required have to be there. We don't, we have certain things that we look at when we give some of these temporary occupancies. So we look at things like the fire suppression systems have to be in fully operational, fully monitored. We look at the access to the building has to be fully acceptable for the public to get there and not have to be fighting for spaces with construction people or whatever. We look at if they're going to occupy with tenants or with the public, then that building has to be fully accessible at that point. If that's happening, it's something that we've either overlooked or missed somewhere, because we normally do not allow a building to be occupied if it doesn't meet the basic requirements of accessibility.
Okay, thank you. And my apologies for all the background noise. I'm right now in the middle of a very noisy building with a lot of traffic going by.
I'm glad you joined us, Annette. Other thoughts, y'all? It is 5 o'clock. Technically, our meeting is supposed to end. So I'm gonna ask each commissioner to send me a text, an email. What's your favorite thing? Seriously, I get real excited about what? Ron? Oh, Yvonne, Bonnie, okay. Your favorite thing that's been modified from an ADA perspective? And yes, Ms. Bonnie.
I just had a quick question before I forgot it. Would it be possible for us to get somebody from the Gilliard to come in for about 15 or 20 minutes at one of our meetings?
I can check into it.
Okay, and I'll discuss with you later about that. Okay, thank you so much.
Okey doke. To you, sir.
So thank you all. I appreciate the building code enforcers enforcement team to be here for us today. Appreciate the conversation and the time you spent with us. We greatly appreciate it. At this time, we'll go into any announcements. Anyone? All right. Our next meeting will be on March 21st, not the last Friday, 4 to 5, right here at 2 George Street. And Anything else from you, Jen? All right, we'll call this meeting adjourned. If I can have someone make a motion to adjourn.
This is Maria, and I make a motion to adjourn.
And I second.
All approve? Aye. All right.
Aye.
Aye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody. Good